In a quiet Montana valley, a boy who had never spoken a word laid his hand on a dying Mustang. And something shifted. The doctors called it a mystery. The townsfolk called it a miracle. But at Timberline Ranch, where grief hung heavier than snow clouds, the silence between them cracked open. What followed wasn't just recovery. It was rebirth. And it all started with a whisper from a boy who never made a sound. The first light of autumn slid gently across the weathered wooden fences of Hollow Creek Valley, waking up this corner of rural Montana with the kind of soft glow that felt like the land itself was breathing. The scent of apple pie drifted from a small kitchen at the edge of the yard, mingling with the smells of hay and old saddle leather that clung to the air around Timberline Ranch. Everything here moved at the unhurried pace of a place where time flowed like a slow stream beneath a canopy of whispering willows. Noah Ellison was 8 years old and hadn't spoken a single word since the day he was born. People called it congenital mutism. But at Timberline, no one spoke in terms of diagnosis. They just called him the Wind Boy because he always appeared at sunrise, barefoot like a shadow of sunlight, quiet as the morning mist. That morning, like so many before, Noah walked the dirt path toward the red barn. The grass was still wet with dew, cool beneath his feet. A faded blue flannel shirt hung loosely over one shoulder, and in his hand he held an old horse brush left on the windowsill by his grandfather the summer before. The Timberline stables were once the pride of Caleb Ellison, who had trained some of the strongest wild Mustangs in western Montana. But now the barn seemed to breathe in shallow rattles of creaking wood and the lingering hoots of owls, unwilling to let go of the night. It had been years since anyone from the ranch had taken home a ribbon from the state rodeo, and longer still since the day Lily died. And Silver Dust, the finest silver-gray horse in the region, refused to rise again. Silver had been rescued 3 years earlier from the Mexican border, part of a bust on illegal wild horse trafficking. He'd arrived at Timberline half-mad, wild-eyed, but Lily, a calm, honey-colored mare, had softened him. From then on, Silver Dust had become the living symbol of the ranch. Until June, when Lily died suddenly during a failed birth. Since then, Silver had withered. Few believed a horse could grieve that deeply, but Silver proved otherwise. For 2 weeks, he hadn't moved from the far corner of his stall head buried in dry straw, breathing heavy, eyes as dull as cooled ash. "If he doesn't eat by the end of the week, we'll lose him," Caleb had whispered to Ruth the night before, his voice echoing against the old house's groaning wood. Noah had heard it all. Not with his ears, but in his grandfather's eyes, the way his fingers twisted the edge of the dish towel, the heavy silence between each word. That morning, just as the first golden beam of sunlight kissed the far ridge, Noah opened the barn door. Silver Dust lay there, motionless. His head tilted faintly toward the door, ears barely twitching. Noah didn't hesitate. He didn't glance around. He just stepped inside. He moved slowly, so gently that even the creak of the wooden floor seemed softer than the wind rattling the tin roof. He sat beside Silver's head, small arms resting on the horse's brow, right where the silver fur still bore a faded stain of sweat from the last time he tried to stand. Silver didn't react immediately, but after a few seconds his great frame shuddered. A long breath escaped from his dry chest, not a groan, not a growl, just a sigh, as if he had just realized he wasn't alone anymore. Noah closed his eyes, hands still resting on Silver's forehead. He didn't rub, didn't coax, didn't speak. He simply sat there, breathing steadily, eyelids lowered, as though he too was drawing warmth from the horse to hold onto something fragile inside. From the barn's shadowed doorway, Caleb stood watching. No one knew when he'd arrived. He didn't speak or step forward. He just clenched his hands and blinked away tears as he saw Silver blink twice for the first time in 2 weeks. "Ruth," he murmured later in the kitchen, "the boy, he did something None of us, no vet, no medicine, could do. That morning, Noah didn't join the family at breakfast. He stayed in the barn. Ruth brought him a slice of buttered bread and a glass of milk, setting them beside him without a word. He ate half, then returned to Silver's side, his hand resting on the horse's neck, eyes fixed on a sky that looked clearer than it had in days. That afternoon, Dr. May Whitmore arrived. A sturdy woman in her 50s with braided salt and pepper hair, she'd been the vet for Timberline since her student days. She hadn't come expecting to help just out of obligation to a place she'd long cared about. She crouched beside Silver with her stethoscope, then suddenly paused. Her hand rose to his forehead, fingers searching for a pulse. Her expression turned sharp. "Caleb," she called, "did you notice his temperature's come down? His skin isn't dry like yesterday." "I know," Caleb said, brows furrowed. "Noah's been there all day. I didn't want to interrupt." Dr. May looked toward the boy cross-legged, leaning softly against Silver's flank, head tilted as though listening to something only he could hear. Silver lay still, but his eyes followed Noah's every movement. "What do you make of it?" she asked, half joking. Caleb chuckled softly, something glowing in his eyes. "I think I'm witnessing something science has no name for." That night, Ruth poured tea, and Caleb, for the first time, told Noah the story of how Lily once calmed Silver during his first fit of panic. Not by touching him, not by coaxing, just by standing there, for hours. Noah listened in silence, fingers tracing a line through the dusty table. "Maybe," Caleb said, hesitating, "every creature needs a patient soul willing to wait before it'll open up." Ruth added quietly, "And that soul doesn't have to speak." Noah didn't respond. He rose, picked up the old horsebrush, and walked back to the barn under a night sky full of stars. Silverdust was asleep, but his ears perked as Noah entered. The boy sat down, didn't start brushing, just laid the brush gently on the mane. Then, softly, he began to hum, not a tune, not a song, just a low, primal sound, like wind through pine under a full moon. A dying Mustang heard it, and a silent boy did something the entire Hollow Creek would remember for a long, long time. The next morning, Hollow Creek woke beneath a sheer layer of mist, soft as silk, draped across the pampas grass fields. Sparrows chirped among the willows, and a breeze skimmed across the still pond, stirring gentle ripples. And in the red barn behind Timberline Ranch, Silverdust, the silver-gray Mustang, had lifted his head. Noah was already there, as he always was before the first light broke. He carried the same worn horsebrush and wore the same faded blue flannel shirt draped over one shoulder. Silverdust was still lying down, but his eyes were wide open, and his ears twitched at the sound of Noah's footsteps brushing across the straw. Ruth saw it first. From the kitchen window, she watched her grandson settle beside Silver, his hand placed softly against the horse's neck, just like yesterday. But something was different today. Silver wasn't still like stone anymore. He looked at Noah, and for the first time in days his lips twitched, like he was trying to form horse speak. She gently set her coffee cup down and called out, "Caleb, Caleb, come see this." Caleb came stumbling out, still wearing his thick wool sweater and sheepskin slippers. He froze at the sight of the barn where he had walked in and out dozens of times the past 2 weeks, like visiting a grave. Silver looked at him, not with the dead stare he had worn for days, but with eyes that had light life. And then, impossibly, he exhaled long and low and stretched his head toward Noah, his muzzle brushing the boy's hand. "Dear Lord," Caleb whispered, he knows the boy." A soft rattle at the ranch gate made both of them turn. A silver pickup had pulled into the driveway. A platinum-haired woman with glasses stepped out from the driver's seat. Dr. May Whitmore, the town's seasoned veterinarian, had arrived earlier than expected. She moved quickly toward the barn, her gaze sharp. "When Caleb calls this early, I get nervous. What's going on?" "See for yourself," Caleb said, gesturing toward the stall. We might not need meds after all." May frowned and stepped inside. She crouched beside Silverdust, laid a hand on his forehead, blinked rapidly. She pulled out a digital thermometer, then reached for the horse's pulse, an old habit she never dropped. "Temperature's dropped," she muttered, half in disbelief. "Pulse is steadier, skin's more supple. He's starting to come back." She glanced toward Noah, still sitting quietly, those warm brown eyes fixed on Silverdust, like the two of them were sharing a silent conversation. "No way," May murmured. "He didn't respond to medication, refused food, but he's responding to this boy." Caleb answered slowly, his voice thick with emotion. "Noah doesn't just sit there, May. He does something I don't have words for. Maybe he can't talk, but he knows how to keep a soul from falling into silence." Dr. May turned toward the boy, and her expression shifted, not clinical, but deeply human. She gave a slow, reverent nod. "This child has something no textbook ever taught me." That night, the Ellison dinner table was quieter than usual. Not out of tension, but because something too profound had happened, and words felt clumsy trying to contain it. Noah sat on his usual wooden chair beside Caleb. He fidgeted with a worn-down pencil, a napkin in front of him now filled with a charcoal sketch, Silverdust, lying on his side, eyes open, with a small star drawn above his head. Ruth looked at the drawing and smiled. "Is that today, Noah?" He didn't answer, but nodded faintly. His eyes stayed locked in that rare, focused intensity. "You draw beautifully," she continued, "just like your mama used to." The word mama caught Caleb for a beat. He stiffened, then nodded slowly, his gaze softening. "Joanna used to draw horses all over the barn walls, said they were the first creatures to teach humans how to wait." Noah listened. He didn't need sound. He absorbed things like soil soaks up the rain. After the meal, he rose, picked up the brush and a small blanket, and stepped outside under the rising moon. Back in the barn, Silverdust was lying more upright now, ears perked. Noah climbed into the stall, draped the blanket over the horse's back, and knelt beside him. His fingers combed gently through the mane, strand by strand, while his lips released soft hum sounds known only to him, primal and steady, like wind threading through pine. Dr. May stood at a distance, joined by Caleb and Ruth. None of them stepped forward. They simply watched. And what they saw was this: Silver blinking more regularly, breathing deeper, shivering at times like something inside was stirring awake. "Caleb," May whispered, "remember when Silver first came here? Took him 40-plus days just to let someone touch him." Caleb nodded. "I remember, but Noah didn't need 40 days. He didn't even need 40 hours. Later that night, long after everyone had gone to bed, Ruth woke to pour herself a glass of water. She glanced out the window and saw the soft glow of a lantern flickering from the red barn. Inside, a small figure sat beside a large body, one without words, one without voice, and together they warmed each other, not with noise, but with presence. Ruth quietly wiped her eyes. In a world so loud it often drowns itself, maybe silence was the only thing that ever truly brought people and animals closer. The next morning, Silverdust rose on his own. It wasn't a lurch. It wasn't unconscious. It was deliberate. His strong legs folded beneath him, then pushed upward slowly but surely. The thud of hooves on the wooden stall floor made Ruth drop an entire spoonful of sugar. Caleb ran outside. Noah stood still, wide-eyed, but not surprised. He had known Silver would stand. He believed it the night before. Silverdust swayed a little, but steadied himself. He looked around, found Noah, and gently nudged the boy's cheek with his muzzle. Dr. May arrived by midday. When she saw Silver on his feet, eating dry hay, tail swishing against the stall, she exhaled in disbelief. "I was going to give him one last injection yesterday," she said. "Now he's standing here like nothing ever happened." Noah stood beside her, face tilted toward the light, his quiet brown eyes reflecting the high noon sun. She bent down to meet his gaze, her voice trembling with relief. "Noah," she whispered, "you didn't say a word, but you just taught us one of the hardest lessons to learn." That same afternoon, Ruth sat down to sew an extra patch into Silver Dust's old blanket. She stitched one single letter in red thread, N, not just for Noah, but for nurture, for the quiet kind of faith a boy had kindled again in a place once thought cold. Dawn in Hollow Creek didn't rise like it did anywhere else. It came slowly, like an old man telling a story light weaving through the birch trees, casting pale orange streaks across dew-soaked ground. The morning breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass, blending with the soft rattle of tin roofs warming under the sun. But this morning felt different. Not because of the weather, but because something miraculous had happened in Timberline's red barn, and the story had already begun to travel. Elsie Doyle, the neighbor from the eastern side of the ranch, took her usual morning walk, just to check if other people's hens were still alive, as she liked to joke. But this morning, as she neared the fence behind the horse barn, she froze like lightning had struck her. Silver Dust, the very Mustang everyone in town had assumed was dying, stood solidly on all four legs, head lowered into a trough of hay, ears flicking and tail gently swaying. And beside him stood Noah, the boy who had never spoken a word in his life, his hand resting calmly on the horse's shoulder, face tranquil beyond belief. Elsie gasped. She squinted, rubbed her eyes, and muttered, "Can't be. I saw that horse flat out yesterday." It didn't take long. Within a few hours, the story had made its way to the clerk at Hollow Creek Feed and Supply, then to the vendors at the town's outdoor market, then through the slow crawl of landline phones, all the way to the little church where Pastor Henry was just beginning to plan Sunday's sermon. By noon, 3 pickup trucks were parked at Timberline's gate. One woman carried an aging Siamese cat that had stopped eating. An elderly man brought a frail old beagle by his side, and a young couple held the lead rope of a traumatized colt named Jasper injured in a trailer accident just weeks before. Caleb looked at the growing line, brow furrowed. "Since when did we start accepting walk-ins?" Ruth wiped her hands on her apron and sighed. "Since the Lord decided to breathe life back into our barn. We're not a vet clinic. No, but apparently Noah might be." Just then, Noah emerged from behind the barn. He didn't flinch at the strangers. He simply nodded, once, then turned to Silver Dust and made a small motion with his hand, as if asking, "Are you ready?" Silver responded with a soft nudge of his muzzle against the boy's hand. The next morning, among the growing crowd, was Otis Franklin, columnist for the Hollow Creek Weekly. He hadn't come to write. He just wanted to see it with his own eyes, after his skeptical wife had described the events of the previous day with tearful conviction. Otis stood beside Dr. May Whitmore, who had now officially declared that Silver Dust was out of danger and recovering well beyond medical expectations. "I don't understand it," May told Otis as he jotted notes. "Maybe it's psychological, maybe it's energy, but none of us could do what Noah did." Otis looked up at the boy, seated cross-legged in the stall, gently brushing Silver Dust's mane, humming that unspoken song again. The horse stood still, eyes half closed, tail flicking like a quiet fan in the heat. "This is a miracle," Otis said softly. "Not one from heaven, but from a child without a voice, who somehow speaks with his entire soul." His article titled "The Silent Boy and the Mustang, the Story That Saved a Ranch" ran in the next day's paper. Within 48 hours, copies of the article spread to nearby towns, then reappeared on a popular veterinary blog in Missoula. But at Timberline, nothing changed. Noah still woke before dawn. He still washed his face with cold well water, slipped on his worn flannel shirt, and walked barefoot to the barn. The only difference now was who awaited him, not just Silver Dust, but also 2 dogs, an injured lamb, and a tailless cat that had taken up residence around the barn. All of them, it seemed, understood one thing: no one here would abandon them. Ruth reorganized the barn's side stalls to lay extra straw. Caleb bought new feeding troughs and installed a gravity-fed water system. "Never imagined I'd be running a healing outpost," he said, half laughing, half worried. "I just wanted to keep our horse fed." Ruth laid a hand gently on his shoulder. "Maybe you still are. Just not only the horse this time." Dr. May began documenting Silver Dust's condition and Noah's in a leather-bound journal, not for research, but because she sensed something unfolding far greater than any professional knowledge. "Day 6 since Noah began caring for Silver," she wrote. "Horse is eating regularly, digestion normal, eyes clear. Most notable, emotional response. Silver begins to seek out Noah. When Noah tends to other animals, Silver stands nearby, watchful, almost protective, as if he's become the boy's guardian." Then she wrote the journal's first truth. "Some healing doesn't come from medicine, but from the primal compassion shared between two beings." That afternoon, a young woman named Chloe Adams arrived, carrying a cat with partial paralysis injured from a fall off a balcony. Noah didn't hesitate. He simply looked at the cat, nodded, then sat beside it. He didn't reach, didn't speak. He just waited. Nearly an hour passed before the cat stirred. Its dazed eyes slowly turned to Noah's as if remembering something. "He's talking to it," Chloe whispered to Ruth. Ruth smiled. Not everyone needs sound to be heard. That evening, after all the visitors had gone, Noah sat on an old feed trough beside Silver Dust. One hand rested on the horse's brow, the other pressed lightly to his own chest, his eyes closed. No one knew what he was thinking. But as Ruth passed by the barn, she heard his soft hum, barely audible, like wind threading through pines. Silver stood still, eyes closed too, as if humming back. She didn't interrupt. She simply stood in the silence of a Montana autumn night, listening to the duet of two forgotten souls, now found. And in that moment she understood. Noah hadn't just saved Silver Dust. He had opened a place where even the deepest hurts could be heard and forgiven. Autumn deepened its hold on Hollow Creek. The birch trees lining the path to Timberline Ranch turned gold, each falling leaf like a piece of memory drifting across memory. Sunlight leaned at sharper angles, now softer, sadder, and the air carried that quiet stillness that always came before something new was born. And yet the ranch had never felt more at peace. Silver Dust now walked with steadiness, though his strength had not fully returned. But more importantly, there was clarity in his eyes, like a soul rediscovering its reason to stay. He never strayed far from Noah. Wherever the boy went, from the feed shed to the pasture gate, from the hayloft to the front porch. Silver was always a few steps behind, ears up, watching, walking as if measuring his stride to the boy's heartbeat. "Like some guardian sent down by the Almighty," Caleb muttered one morning as he tightened the leather on a backup bridle. Ruth chuckled softly, casting a glance at the unlikely pair, a mute boy and a once-broken horse. She sighed, her chest full of something that was half gratitude, half awe. That morning, a weather-worn gray-blue pickup rumbled up the dirt drive. The driver's door creaked open, and out stepped a woman in her 30s with sleepless eyes and a face that had forgotten how to rest. In the back seat lay a golden retriever, shaggy, underfed, its eyes vacant with a grief too deep for barking. "Good morning," the woman said as Ruth came to greet her. "I'm Janine Carter. I heard about this place. And the boy." Ruth smiled gently. "It's not just the boy, dear. It's the boy and the horse." Janine nodded slowly, her gaze drifting to where Noah sat beneath the big oak near the barn, Silver Dust beside him, head tilted slightly, as if listening to the boy's breathing. "His name is Harley," Janine said, voice trembling. "We were together as for 8 years. 2 months ago, our other dog, Jake, passed from cancer. Since then, Harley won't eat, won't play, won't even bark. He just lies there. Ruth asked nothing more. She motioned for Janine to open the truck's back door. When Harley was lifted out, he didn't resist, didn't react. He was like an old blanket that no longer smelled of home. Noah stood, saying nothing. He quietly stepped forward, knelt about 3 feet from the dog, and sat still. No eye contact, no touch, just presence. 30 minutes passed, then 50, then a full hour. Slowly, Harley raised his head. His ears twitched slightly. He sniffed the air. Then cautiously, tentatively, he crawled forward and licked Noah's hand. Janine broke down, not with loud sobs, but the kind of sobs that crack through stone, the kind that echo like wind against canyon walls after being held in for too long. That afternoon, Harley ate again. Not much, but willingly. His eyes followed Noah with the kind of hunger that wasn't for food, but for light. Word traveled just as quickly as before. But this time, something new happened. The ones arriving weren't just physically sick animals. They were emotionally broken. Caleb grew hesitant. "Ruth, he's just a kid. He's not some kind of healer." "I know," Ruth said softly, "but have you seen him turn anyone away?" Then came the next visitor. A jet-black pickup arrived just as the sun dipped below the hills. The man who stepped out was in his late 40s, barrel-chested, with a bristled beard and the gait of someone who'd spent a lifetime in stirrups. In the trailer behind him stood a wild horse, deep brown coat, thick muscles, eyes burning with fire. His name was Canyon. The man tipped his hat. "Ben Tucker, heard about the gray horse, heard about the boy. I want to try." Caleb stepped forward. "Try what? This isn't a training yard." Ben frowned. "Canyon's not sick. He's dangerous. Broke a trainer's leg in Casper. Won't let anyone close." I was ready to put him down. "But when I heard about this place, I figured one last shot." Caleb shook his head. "We don't take on dangerous horses." Ben sighed. "Then I'll be on my way." He turned to leave, but a small hand tugged at the edge of his coat. Noah. The boy looked up into Ben's eyes, then turned toward the trailer, where Canyon stood rigid, every muscle tense, wild eyes locked on them. Noah nodded. Over the next 4 days, Noah never tried to enter the paddock. He simply sat outside the fence, bringing clean water, dry hay, and an old wool scarf his mother once wrapped around him on cold nights. On day 1, Canyon turned his back. On day 2, he kicked the feed trough and slammed his head against the gate. On day 3, he stared at Noah like a threat. But on day 4, when Noah laid the scarf gently on the ground and stepped away, Canyon approached, sniffed it, and bowed his head against the cloth. All 3 of them saw it. Caleb, Ben, and Ruth. "Holy God," Ben murmured. "That horse has never let anyone near." Noah didn't move closer. He simply stood his ground. But from that moment on, Canyon grew quieter. No thrashing, no screams, no panic. That night, Ben sat on the porch steps beside Caleb. "I lost my wife in an accident," he said. "Since then, I stopped believing in anything but a tight rein. But that boy, he lit a lantern I thought had gone out for good." Caleb didn't answer. His eyes lingered on the barn, where the glow of a single lantern cast shadows of a child resting against the belly of a horse, and a wild stallion just a few steps away, no longer running. He nodded softly. He doesn't speak, but he makes everyone listen. The next morning, Canyon ate from Noah's hand. No fear, no flinch. At breakfast, Caleb sat at the kitchen table, watching Ruth pour coffee. "We're witnessing something strange." "No," Ruth said, smiling. "We're witnessing love. So pure. No words can hold it." Just then, a brown envelope arrived by mail, postmarked from the University of Montana. Inside was a handwritten letter from Dr. Annabelle Quinn, a specialist in animal behavior. Her business card was paper-clipped to the top, bearing a short note. "I would like to visit Timberline next week. Not to study, but to learn how to see the world as this boy does. Autumn had its own way of washing sorrow from the hills of Hollow Creek. Leaves fell like unsent letters, and the breeze rolled softly over the ridges like a breath being drawn after a long-held silence. At Timberline, everything had changed in just a few short weeks. The old barn was now cleaned daily, its stalls fresh with hay. Behind the main house, 3 canvas tents had been pitched shelter for those bringing their wounded animals to rest. And out by the front gate, Caleb had nailed a hand-carved wooden sign, the letters painted by Ruth in steady strokes, "A place to heal." And yet, through all the change, 2 things remained untouched: Noah and the rhythm of his quiet. He still woke before the sky turned light, walking barefoot through dew-soaked grass. Still sat beside Silver Dust to brush his mane with the old wooden brush-its handle cracked and worn. Still hummed that soft, wordless tune, something primal, something that felt like prayer. Silver Dust was no longer just a horse that had been saved. He was now something closer to a companion spirit, a guardian soul. Every time Noah stepped out of the barn, Silver was there first. Ears pricked, eyes scanning the field, hooves falling in sync with the boy's silent steps. Some folks joked, if Noah walked into the river, Silver'd swim right along beside him. One Wednesday afternoon, as sunlight stretched long across the ridges, a dusty SUV approached from the north. Mud caked the wheel wells and windshield. From the passenger seat stepped a middle-aged woman with neatly tied brown hair, round glasses, and a tan university jacket stitched with a faded logo. University of Montana, Animal Behavior Unit. On her satchel, barely visible, was a name, Dr. Annabelle Quinn. "Hello," she said, spotting Caleb splitting firewood. "I'm here as promised. No equipment, no surveys, just curiosity and a little reverence." Caleb smiled and nodded toward the southern fence. "You won't have to look far. The 2 you're here for, they're over there." Dr. Quinn walked quietly across the hay-colored field. There, near the fence line, Noah sat with his back turned, one hand resting gently across a small goat's flanket's leg wrapped with a splint. Beside them stood Silver Dust, eyes half-lidded, still as a watchtower. She didn't call his name. She didn't interrupt. She just watched. 20 minutes passed. Slowly, the goat rose, took a few steps into the open grass, steady now. Dr. Quinn opened her notebook and wrote, "Nonverbal communication, not through eye contact, not through speech, but through breath, heartbeat, and presence." In the days that followed, she didn't leave Timberline. She brought no cameras, conducted no interviews. She only observed. She watched as Noah combed the matted hair of a rescued donkey, held a wounded bobcat as it slept without twitching. And, most astonishing of all, she began to notice that sometimes it was Silver Dust who chose which animal needed attention. One morning, Silver wandered to a crate holding an injured finch a neighbor had just brought in. The horse let out a soft nicker. Noah turned immediately, as if hearing a message, and walked toward the cage without hesitation. "It's like a radar," Dr. Quinn murmured, one soul calling to another. Later that week, Ruth served Dr. Quinn's cinnamon tea in the old kitchen. "So," Ruth asked gently, "after all this, what do you think?" Dr. Quinn set her cup down slowly. "I've worked with veterans, PTSD, trauma. I know wounds that don't show on skin." She looked out the window, where Silver Dust was now chasing a fluttering leaf beside Noah, their movements like a wordless symphony. "This boy is teaching us how to listen in silence," she whispered. That same night, Ruth received an unexpected phone call. It was Kate Morrison, a reporter from the local TV station. "I've heard things, from the community, from the university. We'd love to do a short feature, not invasive, not flashy, just a quiet story. If the family agrees." Ruth hesitated. Caleb exhaled deeply. I don't want this place turned into a circus. But Noah. Noah walked over and picked up an old photo of his mother Joanna from the shelf. He placed it in Ruth's hands. His eyes, wide and full, said what no voice ever could. Ruth understood. 3 days later, the film crew arrived. They stayed respectfully distant, never intruding. Their cameras remained far enough that Noah could choose what was seen. One shot silenced everyone. Silverdust lowered his head. Noah pressed his forehead to the horses. And together, they closed their eyes. No music, no narration, just truth, bare and glowing. After it aired, letters poured in from across the region. But they weren't requests for healing. They were messages of thanks. One woman wrote, I hadn't cried since losing my son, but I watched that boy, and I wept, and for the first time I felt my heart return. Another said, please keep it as it is. Don't let timberline become a healing industry. It's a place where lost souls find their way home. And then one foggy morning, Ruth found Noah standing by the frosted window. He was drawing on the glass a child's sketch of a hand holding a hoof. Ruth teared up. Behind her, Caleb placed a warm hand on her shoulder. He's drawing what he feels, Caleb whispered, a path without footprints, but lined with souls being led home. As sunlight broke through the clouds, the drawing slowly melted away. But what stayed etched into their hearts was something far more lasting. That timberline was alive again, not through noise, not through fame, but through love, quiet, steady, and real. The early winter winds came early to Hollow Creek, carrying the scent of young pine, decaying bark, and the quiet chill of dew that hadn't yet frozen. The sun hadn't fully risen. Just enough light to tint the low mist into a milky veil that wrapped Timberline Ranch like a dream still breathing. And yet, through that mist, something remained unmistakably clear. The footsteps of Noah Ellison, light as falling leaves, steady as ever, along the frost-kissed path to the rear barn. He walked slowly, a handful of fresh grass in one hand, his eyes fixed ahead on silver dust. Despite the cold, Noah remained barefoot. Ruth had warned him more than once, but Caleb had simply said, the boy needs to touch the ground. He feels the world in ways we don't. Silver Dust stood beneath the barn eave, his black mane fluttering softly in the wind. When he saw the boy approaching, he nickered gently and lowered his head, touching his muzzle to Noah's forehead. Since that day in early fall, he'd become a shadow that never left, except when Noah gave him a particular sign. 3 fingers tapped gently against the heart. No one taught the gesture. No one explained it. Butte Silver understood. That morning, Ruth rose earlier than usual. She brewed a fresh pot of ginger coffee, placing an extra cup beside her own for a visitor she knew was coming. And just as the clock hit 7:10, a black pickup bearing the Wild Heart Conservancy logo rolled up to the gate. 2 figures stepped out. Miguel, a Saul forest ranger with steady hands, and a tired-looking young woman in a brown leather jacket, her eyes red from sleepless nights. In the truck bed sat a long, low cage wrapped in mesh and canvas. Inside, curled tight, was a trembling wolf pup ash-gray fur, ribs visible. "This is Luna," Miguel said. "She was rescued from an illegal breeding den near the border. We suspect she's the offspring of a pure wild gray, but she's been in captivity too long, doesn't respond to instinct, won't eat, won't rest. She's fading fast." Ruth looked to Noah. He didn't speak. He only stepped forward, eyes locking gently with the wolf's through the mesh, then turned and walked straight to the north quarantine stall, a side barn that hadn't been used in years, now clean, filled with fresh straw, and lit by a small window facing the pasture. "You want to place her there?" Ruth asked softly. Noah nodded, and somehow Silver Dust seemed to understand more deeply than anyone. He approached the truck, unafraid. He stopped 2 strides from the cage, lowered his head to the earth, and remained still for 15 minutes. At first, Luna cowered in the corner, but then, as if answering some invisible call, she inched forward, laid her head against the bars, and mimicked Silver's stillness. No one said a word, no camera clicked, no one whispered. It was as if something sacred had passed through every skin. On day 1, Noah didn't enter. Ho sat outside the stall, under the eave, tracing circles into the dirt with a pine twig. Silver Dust lay beside him, a statue of protection. Luna stayed hidden, but didn't whimper, just watched. On day 2, Noah brought a strip of cooked meat wrapped by Ruth's hand. He placed it a few feet from the door and backed away. Luna watched for hours, and then took it. On day 3, she drank water from the bowl he left by the wall. Silver nickered once, softly, like encouragement. On day 4, Noah placed his hand on the wooden rail. Luna didn't flinch. On day 5, he leaned his forehead against the plank. Luna stepped forward and pressed her muzzle to the exact spot. Everything happened slowly, deliberately, without pressure, without noise. Each day, Ruth and Caleb stood at a distance. Dr. Quinn, still living in the guest loft, began filming, but not for science. She said quietly, "This isn't evidence. It's grace captured on film, because science hasn't grown humble enough to accept it." By week 2, Luna was eating regularly. Her coat had softened. Her eyes were brighter, though still carried a sadness, as if she knew she didn't belong here, but also had nowhere else to go. Then one morning, Noah brought something new, a small red scarf, his mother's old handkerchief, hidden in a drawer for years. He folded it gently and placed it in the stall. Luna dragged it to the corner. That night, for the first time, she slept without trembling. Week 3, Noah did what no one expected. He opened the gate, he walked in, and sat. No announcements, no warning, just a boy stepping into a cage. Silver Dust remained just outside, standing sentinel. Luna didn't growl, didn't retreat. She walked slowly toward him, sniffed the small scar on Noah's left palm, then lowered her head. When Noah laid his hand on her brow, she didn't move. Dr. Quinn, watching from behind the barn, wiped tears from her face. That week, a local photographer named John Blakely visited Timberline. Caleb had invited him quietly. He brought no big lights, no filters, just an old Leica and hands that trembled when he saw what unfolded. He captured one image. A boy bathed in morning light, his hand resting on the crown of a sleeping wolf, with the silhouette of a silver Mustang watching from beyond the bars. He titled the photo, "The Silent Touch." The picture spread across Montana. Local papers reprinted it. A national outlet asked for syndication rights. Ruth declined them all. "No one gets to sell this light," she said. "It belongs to every soul that needed someone to reach them." On day 21, they opened the back pasture gate. The area was enclosed, but open enough to feel wild. And for the first time, Luna stepped into the sun. Noah walked beside her. Silver Dust led them both. When the wind rolled over the hills, Luna lifted her head and howled. A long, high, pure sound. No tremble, no fear. The entire ranch stopped. Everyone listened. And then, from places no one could name, animals began to appear. A one-legged red fox. A solitary penguin, disoriented and far from its range. A limping deer without a herd. No one brought them. No one led them. They just came. Caleb sat on the porch, watching the silent procession, one boy, one horse, one wolf move together through dry winter grass. He looked to Ruth, voice low as the wind. The boy's not calling them. Then who is? He shook his head slowly. It's the silence, the kind he carries. It opened a door, and on the other side, the whole world's waiting to be reached. The first winter night fell over Timberline like a lullaby. Snow hadn't touched the ground yet, but its scent drifted in the wind, a clean, piercing cold that carried both memory and old wounds. The lantern on the porch still glowed each evening, flickering softly in the dark like a promise. Thought no matter how loud or lost the world became, this place would keep the fire alive. Noah Ellison now had a nightly ritual walking silver dust through the small back pasture behind the house. The winter grass had turned brittle, but still swayed under each hoofstep like it remembered spring. The boy didn't speak, didn't smile, but something inside him had changed, subtly, quietly. He didn't beam. He glowed. Silver dust moved beside him, ears alert, steps measured, steady as a weathered captain leading his ship through the fog. And Luna, the once shattered wolf pup now, followed just a few paces behind, calm, careful, no longer afraid. Ruth sat on the porch with a quilt draped across her knees and a steaming mug in her hands. She watched the three shadows moving through moonlight, then whispered into the cold, "We thought we were saving the boy, but it turns out he's the one keeping the light for us." 1 week later, on the very day the first snow finally fell, the old black pickup from the County Center for Special Youth pulled up to the gate. Vernon, the director, stepped out, not just with folders in hand, but with a question the family had long been expecting. "Do you think Noah is ready to rejoin the therapy program?" Caleb and Ruth sat with him at the kitchen table, their faces drawn tight between hope and dread. But before either could speak, Noah walked in. He didn't make eye contact, but he didn't hide. In his hand, he held Silver Dust's lead rope. The horse stood just outside the window, watching. Noah placed a stack of papers on the table. Not a withdrawal form, not a medical file, a drawing, in soft pencil. Were rough and smudged, but full of feeling. It showed a boy kneeling beside a cage, one hand resting on the head of a wolf, a horse beside them with its head bowed like in prayer. And at the top, in shaky block letters, "I don't need to be fixed. I already belong." Vernon stared at the drawing for a long, long time, then leaned back in his chair with a sigh. I've never seen a child say so much without speaking a single word. 1 month later, the local council granted Timberline an official designation as a Healing Connection Center. No hospital label, no religious title, not a nonprofit. Just a place where souls no one else could reach might find their way back. The first to arrive was a 10-year-old girl named Lacey. She had severe anxiety and hadn't let go of a tattered blanket in 3 years. But on the 5th day at Timberline, she dropped it to wrap her arms around Silver Dust's neck. Then came Drew, a teenager who had been living on the streets after escaping an abusive home. He rarely spoke, but asked if he could muck stalls in the mornings, and every time Noah walked to the field, Drew quietly followed, learning how to listen by being still. And then, one cloudless morning, something happened that no one expected. Noah spoke. He didn't yell, didn't stutter out of fear, just lifted his face to the group gathered near the barn kids and adults, each carrying their own invisible weight, and said, halting but clear, "I know." Everyone froze. Ruth dropped her cup. Caleb whipped around. Noah looked down, then placed his hand on Silver Dust's neck and continued, "I know. You're hurting, but it's okay. Here is safe." It wasn't long, it wasn't eloquent, but it shattered something no one had dared to name. And all at once, people began to cry. Not because Noah had finally spoken, but because he had reached them. Later that season, as winter settled in, Ruth hung a new sign at the front gate. The old one had simply read, "Timberline Ranch." The new one read, "The Place of Quiet Light, where the light comes without being called." And beneath that, someone, probably Caleb, had carved another line in small, careful script. Dedicated to the boy who never needed to speak to be heard. Noah didn't talk much after that, but he drew, he wrote, he touched, and silver dust remained beside him, always. A living reminder that no matter how many voices the world silenced, there would always be a place where light could return quietly without fanfare. At Timberline, no one had to be whole to be loved. At Timberline, even the silent could be the ones who carried the light for others. If this story moved something in you, even just a little, drop a 0 in the comments, or type 1 if you believe in second chances. Your comment might be simple, but it means the world to us. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell. More true, heart-touching stories like this one are coming soon. You won't want to miss what happens next.